Hey there, do you want to be one of the best blade masters? Then listen up, since I can help you. This will be my insights on the class after playing Neo in Korea, including the skill tree, what skills you will need and when to use which. Hopefully you will be able to take something from this video and incorporate it into your own journey. If you do, please let me know how it went. Let's start with the basics of the new skill system and then we will go in depth into each skill. Here's the full skill tree for the Blade Master. To upgrade your skills you will use skill books, each skill book holding a specific variant of a skill. Skill books come in different rarities, coming from common greys over to rare purples. For example, I have the specific purple book equipped, giving me the best fire spec Lunar Slash variant. In general, the better the quality of the book is, the stronger the skill will be. These can be slotted into your accessories, giving you the flexibility to customize your build. Think of it as fine-tuning your BM to fit your playstyle. In general, you've got 6 accessories and each can hold up to 3 different skill books. You will have to insert the skill book into its corresponding gear slot, indicated by one of these icons. Tiny update from the Korean server. Korea has made adjustments to the way the skill system works. You can now insert the same skill book multiple times to have small additional effects like cooldown reduction and more damage, essentially removing the accessory specific book feature and allowing you to stack a certain book as many times as you want. We can only hope that this will not ship to the global release. But man, what skill should I even go for? Don't worry, I got you. Now then, let's dive into the important details. I will walk you through each skill, explaining when to use specific variations and what key factors to keep in mind when creating your build. PS. Your right mouse button ability in basic stance. It is part of your main damaging abilities. The first path is your go-to option, especially in the early game with its lowest G cost out of all of them, and being the same pierce veterans will be used to. Path 2 is a slight variation of the first pierce, adding an additional parry pierce effect, which sadly isn't very useful since it doesn't penetrate actual block effects. It has a higher G cost in favor of a small amount of higher damage, due to which endgame players with mostly blue and purple books will choose to use this skill, since they have less G problems to worry about in general. Alongside the first path, it's mostly used in pierce focused builds because of their identical behavior. Path 3 is a new variation of pierce, which adds an AoE effect with a longer wind-up animation. It's a great option for PvE and one of my personal favorites. It's usually used in pierce-only builds with a focus on max boosting abilities, or as a backup damaging option for in-between rotations or as a rotation filler. Of course it can be used in the same builds as Path 1 and 2, but due to the longer wind-up animation, it often makes it harder to implement it. Make sure to prioritize pierce, since it's one of your 2 core damaging abilities. It's relied upon in pierce-focused builds, and especially good in the early game. Cyclone replaces your left mouse button after a successful block. It's mostly used as a utility skill for focus regeneration or the Black Dragon buff. Path 1-1 gives you the most focus recovery out of all the options we have here. It's especially good for DPS BMs. Path 1-2 is an essential skill for PvP, giving you iframes during the spin animation, which makes it a huge asset in your PvP adventures. Path 2 is kind of a new variation of Cyclone. It gives you less focus than 1-1, but it gives you the Black Dragon effect, which is really great for any fire or lightning build, and it's especially good for anybody tanking. If you tend to find yourself tanking a lot, you should definitely prioritize this skill, since being able to properly utilize it for its G recovery will be massive. Just be careful to actually not get hit and block enemy attacks. Shoulder charge. Your C button in normal stance, which mostly gives you the ability to daze opponents and heal yourself. Path 1 becomes an AoE version, with mostly only niche use cases. For example, in PvP it's good against classes with defense and parries like BMs, KFMs, Destroyers, BDs, because it pierces defense and parry. Path 2 is your go-to option in PvE. It gives you iframes, it heals you, and it gives you additional focus regeneration. At the same time, it can be really good in PvP if you need the healing or additional iframes. Path 3 is your go-to option in PvP, since it becomes a 60 meter gap crosser and makes it a really good skill to tag chase and punish your opponents with. Essentially in PvE this skill is not really a priority unless you absolutely need extra iframes and focus regeneration. However, for PvP it's one of your core CC abilities, and especially with the gap crosser of Path 3 can be really deadly. Flock of Blades, your V skill in normal stance, and unofficial third stance, making it your burst window with great focus recovery skills at your disposal. As useful as this stance may be, the skill books are not. Path 1-1 is essentially useless. The purple version might be nice for small focus regeneration, and that it breaks you from snares like FM freezes. It just doesn't offer anything nice. Path 1-2 is huge for PvP, because with it you can break grabs, meaning whenever a BD or destroyer grabs you, you can just escape by pressing V. Path 2 makes this an entirely new skill with its own damaging capabilities. Veterans will be happy to see the legendary blade call return and being a very useful high damaging option. It's great for openers and burst phases. Just beware that you can easily miss with moving targets, so make sure to mostly just use this for stationary bosses. It can also be utilized in PvP in combination with an air combo if used right after launching an opponent into the air. If anything, this is more of a 1v1 setup and tech trap reminiscent of old 2016 tournaments. Honestly, this skill is never a priority for you, unless you're already decked out with everything else you need and absolutely want to have that extra amount of damage on your PvE openers. For PvP, the grab breaks can be huge and will completely change the way you play against BDs, FMs and the destroyers. Take Flight is your F skill on stunned or dazed opponents, launching them into the air and enabling you to air combo them. Path 1 is honestly pretty useless. Maybe the purple skill has potential, since with it you're able to launch enemies from a distance with your Flock of Blades stance active, but who would even want to pay for that? Path 2 makes this an AoE launch. It's surely nice if you want to have it, but the problem with this spec is that BM doesn't have much setup to even utilize it correctly. It really only has Lightning Rod in Flock stance or Shoulder Charge to even AoE CC enemies, which are both dazes that can easily be rolled. Path 3 changes the skills dynamic and removes the whole launching enemies into the air aspect, making it instead a knockdown, which still only applies on stunned or dazed opponents. It can be nice for fire or lightning builds relying on the Black Dragon buff, but it's not part of any major conventional build, and it's mostly only used for filling your rotation off cooldown. Honestly, this is one of the skills that you can just almost always salvage and forget about. In Korea I didn't even equip it. It might have some niche uses, as I already mentioned, but there's not really any version that's offering you something life-changing that the base skill can't do. Flicker, your left mouse button in draw stance. It's part of your main damage abilities. It's mostly used in fire and lightning builds. Path 1-1 is an AoE flicker that ramps up in speed with a free use after each crit. It's nice for AoE farming mobs, but it's mostly a standalone skill without much synergies. It's like a good early game option while you're still struggling with skill books. It's definitely a skill with potential that you should keep an eye out for in future builds. I myself have grown quite fond of it while still struggling with getting green books. Path 1-2 is a staple for PvP, giving your flicker a stun on first use every 45 seconds. It might be a bit unintuitive, but you will have to get used to not using your flicker as freely or be skill depth. Path 2 is your good old fire spec that has been changed into a single target spec. It attacks instantly at max speed compared to Path 1-1, and it's really nice for fire builds with a downtime between Black Dragon buffs. Additionally, it lets you use Violent Blade, a draw stance block on your F after using the skill. Path 3 is your lightning spec version of Flicker. It's an AoE skill and is free to use after a crit. Sadly, you can only get it as a blue book. A major part of this skill is that it reduces the cooldown of your tap skill, which makes it nice for lightning and hybrid builds, about which we will talk in a different video about. At the same time, it lets you use Violent Blade, a draw stance block on your F after using the skill, exactly the same as the fire spec. Although this skill is one of your main damaging abilities, it is not as prioritized as the other core abilities, since a particular version is not required for any build, while it's still a good skill to use during rotation downtimes. I would go for it after having made sure that my core rotation is intact. Lunar Slash is a right mouse button in draw stance and the core damaging ability in draw stance for any fire or lightning build. Path 1-1 is generally not used outside of Pierce only builds. It makes you leave draw stance but gives maximum boost, which enables your Pierce to be used without a wind up at max speed, about which we will talk in the dedicated build video about. Path 1-2 is your dedicated PvP spec. It stuns your opponent for 2 seconds if they're blocking, and then disables the block for another 8 seconds. Honestly, just don't use this one. It's very niche, and the pros of other options just outweigh its usefulness. Surely you can somehow make it work in PvP, and I will be amazed if you do. So let me know. Path 2 is a fire spec called Dragon Time. Veterans will fondly remember the skill. It has now become single target and costs no focus. On its own it has a huge 6-second cooldown, making it a rather bad option. But during the Black Dragon buff you will be able to spam this skill freely. So make sure to always combine this skill with other skills that grant the Black Dragon buff, like your tap, your Cyclone or your Flock of Blade Axe. At the same time it reduces your tap cooldown for every successful hit, which makes it heavily reliant upon your dragon tanks to reduce your tap's cooldown to be able to continue DPSing. It's kind of this loop. You press your tap, press dragon tank, which reduces your tap's cooldown, and then you press tab again to be able to use your dragon tank freely once again. Due to which it can be heavily punished with big downtimes if you get disturbed during your rotation, making it a high risk, high reward option. Because of this fact, it's generally not advised for PvP, since the window for damage is small, with high cooldowns, and you can be easily interrupted in PvP. Path 3 is your all-beloved classic lightning spec, making this an attack without any cooldowns, that consumes some focus. It is an AoE attack which makes it quite lovely to play, compared to the previous Dragon Tank. Similar to Dragon Tank, it also gets buffed by the Black Dragon buff, decreasing its focus consumption by 1 and making it do more damage. Another big factor is that it recovers 1 focus on crit. If you now combine the Black Dragon buff with crits, you will be able to cast it without any focus cost. Sadly, it's blue book only, so a little bit hard to get. And since it doesn't have a small window of opportunity for actually attacking compared to Dragon Time, makes this actually a great staple for PvP. To summarize it all up, this is one of your most important skillbook choices that will determine your whole build alongside your Lunar Slash and Pierce. Every single skillbook path has its own build. I would recommend going for path 2 or 3 if you want to play the classic BM playstyle that's reliant on draw stance. And path 1 if you intend to go for a non-draw stance build, more focus on Pierce and Lunar Slash. Path 1. Rush is your 2 in basic stance and your main gap closer. It's part of your core utility abilities. Path 1-1 is used in PvE as a quick gap closer with a low cooldown of 6 seconds. It offers great chi regeneration, making it your go-to option in almost every mode. Path 1-2 is your core ability in PvP. It offers a 2-second stun on a 30-second cooldown. And additionally, with the blue book it blocks approach, which is pretty huge in PvP, making enemies unable to use dashes. Path 2 makes this an entirely new skill that's intended to offer additional damage. It has a big cooldown of 45 seconds. It changes your gap closer to a 5-hit attack that deals decent damage. If you don't need a low cooldown chi regeneration or gap closer, this can be a good way to fill the hole in your rotation. This skill is absolutely the most important CC ability for PvP you should be prioritizing. In PvE it can make builds based on Pierce and Lunar Slash a lot more comfortable, with a good way to recover focus on a short cooldown. After getting my core damage build working, I would prioritize getting this skill as a utility. Anklebiter is generally just a skill used to knock down your opponent, and comes in different flavors with minor benefits. Path 1-1 makes this KD a 3-second one, and with the blue book it gives you a +3 chi on hit, making it essentially free to use. But it's still hardly worth it to get the blue book. Path 1-2 is honestly almost the same thing, just giving your opponent a -30% movement debuff. Just like in the previous one, the blue book makes this a 5-meter AoE, but still hardly worth it. However, Path 2 changes this skill into a damaging AoE dot. The damage itself is nothing really special, you mostly just get the blue book version for its focus recovery. It can be actually quite pleasant, and it's pretty easy to use, just off cooldown. In summary, Anklebiter is not really on any kind of priority list. The base skill already does all you want it to do, and everything else is just a little bit of an added comfort, like additional 2-meter range with the blue books or the enemy debuff. The only thing I would keep an eye out for is a blue book version of Path 2, since it will give you additional focus recovery while being very easy to weave into your rotation. Lunar Slash, your tap skill is your most important skill around, which every single build and rotation will be centered around, except for maybe the Pierce only build. Path 1-1, it has no cooldown and is always at max speed, unlike when you don't use any skill bots for this skill. The thing that makes it great is that it can be animation cancelled with other skills like Pierce or your left mouse button. Another good thing is that it's not reliant on any badge, but also doesn't synergize with any of them unless you combine it with Pierce. In that sense, it's really great for PvE and PvP. It's a great damaging option with the Lunar Pierce build. Going into this in-depth will require its own video. Path 1-2 gives your tab a 2-second dex on a 45-second cooldown, similar to the stun that Flicker receives in its 1-2 path, which is great for PvP and has been a staple for the class for over the last 10 years. It's quite similar to the first path, but I would not recommend using this in your actual damaging combos, as you will most likely accidentally use your days if you don't track the cooldown carefully. Path 2 makes this your fire spec, giving you the Black Dragon buff of 6 whole seconds, and will be your main way of keeping this buff active. This makes it great for enabling your fire or lightning slash abilities. Path 3 is your lightning spec and almost the same skill as Path 2, except for a nice new blue animation. It offers great focus recovery, which is important for the lightning build to keep up its rotation. Sadly, that's all the benefits it offers, since its Black Dragon buff, which is the main selling point of your tab skill, sits at a 3-second duration. That is half the duration compared to the fire spec. Although the buff is not as essential for lightning builds as it is for fire builds, since it only really brings minor damage increases and focus recovery benefits along with it for a lightning build. Having said that, it's generally more advised to go with the fire spec, unless you really insist on the honestly great additional focus generation. Without wasting words, Lunar Slash is your biggest priority build-wise. It enables every single build in its own unique way and will be an essential part of your rotation. I would recommend to either go for Path 1-1 for Pierce builds or Path 2 for any draw stance related builds. Raid is your 2 in draw stance and short cooldown gap closer. There's honestly not much to say about it, except that it's a comfy gap closer and focus regenerator. Both specs don't really offer much changes to the core utility of this skill. Path 1 gives you additional focus regeneration and a little movement speed buff on a short cooldown. Path 2 gives a hit enemy a minus 50% movement speed debuff on a higher cooldown than Path 1. At the same time, the blue book is something to keep an eye out for in PvP, since it disables approach skills on the enemy target, with which an enemy is unable to use dash or gap close abilities. In summary, this is not much of a priority and one of your last skills you would usually aim for. You can honestly just pick a path out of your own preference or skip it entirely. 5-point strike is your second dash and draw stance that deals damage over 5 quick hits. It offers a variety of different utilities through its specs, with it being a big staple for PvP. Path 1 is your standard PvE option, which makes this skill have a small iframe at the beginning of the animation. Having an iframe and draw stance that doesn't make you leave draw is huge for your damage uptime. It's just very comfortable all around to have it. Path 2 is your standard PvP option, which turns the skill into a CC ability that does up to 3 dazes on your opponent. Additionally, with the blue book, it will launch any dazed opponent into the air, which happens really quickly. It's essentially a fan favorite of PvP veterans. At the same time, I can personally talk about its viability in PvE, especially in combination with a dazed shoulder charge spec. With this combination, you will be able to apply 4 dazes on the boss quite quickly. Just make sure to not use the air launch option in PvE, or else any melee will hate your ass. Path 3 makes this into a purely damaging ability that benefits heavily from being used inside the Black Dragon buff. From experience, this skill actually deals some good damage if used inside the Black Dragon buff, and can be nice for last hitting bosses. The only problem I found with this build is that it has to be used inside the Black Dragon buff, in which you actually want to use your Dragon Tongue or Lunar Slash. More often than not, it resulted in more rotation downtime after it's used due to missing the last few attacks to reset my Lunar Slash cooldown completely. To put it in a nutshell, it's a great utility skill that has its uses in every way of playing. I would make sure to get myself at least one of these 3 options in my skill book choices. Flashstep, your F ability in draw stance after you crit a flicker. It's a great damage tool with which you can easily reposition yourself and even use it up to 3 times on crit. Path 1 keeps it simple, as it just adds more damage on the second and third cast, while remaining an AoE ability that can be used freely after a crit on flicker. Path 1-2 doesn't change much either from the already good base formula. It just adds more damage to this ability at the cost of a higher cooldown. Path 1-3 is now finally starting to cook something up, with it becoming a single target spell that moves you behind the enemy. Similarly to BD Flashsteps in the past, it deals extra damage on CC'd opponents, which makes this one of your burst abilities for PvP with huge damage potential in combos. At the same time, this viability will shine just as well in future solo content like Mushin's Tower, where you're able to chain CC your bosses and essentially PvP combo them. Let's not forget that it also enhances damage during the Black Dragon buff, which makes this a viable option for people wanting to play both PvP and PvE, with a draw stance reliant build. Path 2 is honestly the same ability as Path 1 and 3. I'm not sure why they're separated into different skill trees. This time around it only has its use case in PvE, doing more damage during the Black Dragon buff. It has a lower CD than 1-3, and being a single target ability moves you behind the target as well. This skill, just like the one before, makes it giga easy to reposition, while enabling you to comfortably weave this ability into your draw stance rotation and just continue DPSing without any big downtimes like the first 2 paths would do. TLDR, Flashstep is a great tool in PvE for early damage and repositioning, with the single target specs having the huge benefit of being easily used inside your rotation. However, in PvP it's one of your highest hitting abilities, and being able to hit all 3 instances on a CC'd opponent is not easy, but will definitely kill them. Whew, almost there. Lightning Draw is your 4 in both stances. It's an iconic skill for the Blade Master, and with Flashstep it's one of your essential burst skills. There's 3 easy to distinguish paths for this skill. Path 1 is your PvP spec since it does a big amount of additional damage on CC targets. becoming the burst skill for you to use. I would recommend using it in combination with your stun too, creating the combo of dash stun into lightning draw 4 in quick succession. Path 2 is a fire PvE spec that still retains a bursty nature of the skill. It gives lightning draw an additional red AoE dot alongside its initial burst. This spec is rather used for the initial AoE burst than the AoE damage over time, because of which I would recommend it against moving targets. For this reason it can be a nice skill for both PvE and PvP. Path 3 is the second PvE spec and lightning variation that acts just the same as Path 2. The big difference here is that the initial burst lacks in power, but the AoE dots will take you for a huge amount of damage. Another nice addition is that the animation is nicely colored alongside its element. To summarize, Lightning Draw has a clear distinction between its specs and their use cases. One is for PvP against CC'd opponents, another is for burst with a weak dot, and the third has a strong damage over time but lacks in burst damage. It's a question of how PvP or PvE oriented you want to be. Honestly, it's just preference. You might as well just use your visual preference for this choice. Soaring Falcon is your C in basic stance. It throws your weapon at the enemy, dealing honestly forgettable damage. It's much rather a utility skill used for focus regeneration or CC. Path 1 is your go-to option in PvE, as it offers a huge amount of focus regeneration on a short cooldown. This would be part of your main focus regeneration skills. Path 2 changes the skill into the famous Hong Z or HMZ in short, as it was quite difficult to acquire in the initial launch of the game. It turns the skill into you pulling non-boss opponents very quickly towards you and stunning them for 3 seconds on a 1 minute cooldown. This book is an absolute priority in PvP and will massively change how you're able to play, since it's able to pierce defense and parry. It's especially fun in open world PvP where you're able to pull enemies towards your team or even down from a platform. Path 3 is similar to Path 2 in the way that it also pulls your opponent towards you, but it applies only at days that can be easily F-rolled. Another thing is that it doesn't pierce defense anymore, only parry, making it a lot less useful than the other version. On the positive, it's only a 24-second cooldown, massive difference, which makes this an actually viable pick in niche matchups like against the spinner classes BD and Destroyer. It's still a very fun skill to use in open world PvP, beware that both these skills don't work on large bosses. Path 4 is quite simple compared to the previous two, and just simply applies knockdown in your opponent on a very short cooldown. It returns to the slow animation of the base skill or Path 1, and is mainly used in PvE to knock down bosses. To sum things up, Soaring Falcon is a good utility ability that you can either greatly use in PvP for its pulling specs, or it's great to use for massive focus recovery with Path 1, or just knockdowns with Path 4. I would at least get myself the focus recovery version. Das Boot, your X ability with which you will be able to kick your opponents in the face. It's a rather underutilized skill with its niche uses. Its main feature is that it stuns defending or blocking opponents for 2 seconds, making it one of the ways we as BMs can deal with blocking or countering classes like BM, Sin or KFM. Path 1 is honestly just completely useless until you get the blue book, which turns this skill actually useful for once and makes it a knockdown on a short 9 seconds cooldown. This version is a staple ability for PvP and any veteran will know the feeling of not having it. Path 1-2 is just like the previous version, completely useless until the blue book, at which point the skill turns into an amazing short cooldown source for the maximum boost buff, which lets you use your Pierce without any slow build up at instant max speed. As boring as the first two paths were, Path 2 makes this a completely new skill for BM, essentially turning the single target knockdown kick into an AoE knockdown on quite a long cooldown. It's a great option for open world PvP and 6v6 since BM lacks in general a lot of AoE CCs. In conclusion, Boot is one of the last skills you should be prioritizing, unless you want its great CC capabilities for PvP. The worst part is that until the blue book, it doesn't even offer anything worth mentioning. except just the Path 2 that turns it into an entirely new skill. Breeze is your most basic skill on your left mouse button that you will use from level 1. It's mostly used as an easy way to regenerate focus without cooldowns, except in the Lunar Pierce build where it's actually part of your main rotation. Path 1 is quite a letdown until you get the purple version. It really only offers you more damage on a skill you don't even actively use for damage. On the other hand, the purple book is quite the game changer for builds that use it in their rotation, since it gives you an additional focus regen for each target hit. This will hugely improve your rotation uptime in the Lunar Pierce build. Path 2 turns this into a single target spell that blades your target. I would recommend to go for this variation if you don't need the AoE damage. Being able to properly bleed bosses can make all the difference for certain bosses, since bleeds and deep wounds apply an anti-heal effect on the target and fast circumvent either their natural health regeneration or healing mechanics. It's also to be noted that it's absolutely not worth to go for the blue book here, since it only offers you more damage. After the first two easy to distinguish choices of Path 1 and 2 comes Path 3 with a more niche approach to things. With this skill you will be able to get the maximum boost buff on critical hits for your Pierce to be instantly at max speed, which makes this a fantastic choice for Pierce builds. Since this skill requires you to land a crit, I would only recommend using it at the absolute endgame in combination with a Lunar Pierce build, in which you will actually have the skill in your main rotation. From personal experience, it's a bit awkward to use, since most of the time you can hardly guarantee a crit in your constantly ongoing rotation. On the positive side, this skill makes it actually kind of playable to use the third spec Pierce inside the Lunar Pierce build, since you will not have that long wind-up animation holding you back. To summarize, the skill is not really on any priority list. It's nice to have in the one specific build where you're actually using it as part of your rotation, and where it has quite the big potential with Path 3 and the purple Path 1. But everywhere else you're just better off using the basic skill and skipping the skill book altogether. Block. Your one ability in both stances is one of the most iconic and core skills a Blade Master has. With it you are able to block frontal attacks by holding your weapon in front of you. It will always put you back into basic stance. It is to be noted that every blue book of this skill offers a legendary Hong Moon block, or HMB in short. It is a skill that gives your entire party a 5-second iframe that lasts for 3 hits, refreshing the duration after each hit. During this time window you're able to continue playing your character without anything holding you back. Getting this skill makes a huge difference in party play, and players in every party will love you for using it in critical moments to save your party from mechanics. At the same time, let's not forget its huge implications for 1v1 PvP. Another key piece of information to remember is that it's highly recommended to be used alongside Pierce, since blocking attacks will give you the maximum boost buff. This interaction enables one of your most basic rotations of blocking an attack, using Cyclone to regain focus, and then use Pierce at max speed. Path 1-1 is your de facto PvE spec, giving you a 4-second block on a 2-second cooldown. Another huge part is that you're able to use the War Cry skill, which taunts enemies to attack you and is sadly your only way of creating threat as a tank. Path 1-2 is your standard PvP and solo content spec, which gives you a 0.5 second parry at the beginning of the block, which will stun any enemy that hits into it for 2 seconds, unless they're using a parry piercing skill. So make sure to time your block perfectly before an enemy attacks you, to parry their attack successfully. This playstyle will take some getting used to, but can make a huge difference once mastered in PvP and solo PvE content. Path 2 changes the formula and gives up the blocking aspect of the whole skill, in favor of giving it a pretty big 1-second parry window, double the uptime of the previous skill. This makes it a high risk, high reward option in PvP, since it leaves you wide open for attacks without any way to block attacks with its 3-second cooldown. All in all, block is one of your core abilities, and mastering its proper use will make the difference between a beginner Blade Master and an expert. I can highly recommend for everyone to get a blue book version for any of these paths, since the implications of Hong Moon block in party play are just truly game changing. Now, All that's left is a summary and the most important takeaways. BM is one of the highest DPS classes in the game, with great all-around capabilities and a great variety of viable build combinations, with which you can make the class just the way you like to play it. It's quite easy to pick up and start playing decently, but at the same time there's a huge skill ceiling with proper stance, iframe and block utilization that will set the veterans apart. To sum up all the things we discussed in this video, I have created a small tier list of the most important skills you should be focusing on for PvE and PvP. For PvE you have the following tier list that's ranked by how much these skills determine your build and gameplay. The tiers of priority consist of the following things: your core skills that will determine your whole build and should be your first priority to decide on, followed by your most important skills of focus recovery, then the rest of your damage abilities, after which comes skills that will make your life all around just more comfortable, but shouldn't be prioritized right off the bat. At the end we have the skills that are just purely filler and you could honestly go without, unless for their niche use cases that we've already talked about. The things I would additionally mention here are the following. For your build you would at first either prioritize Pierce or Hone Slash based on your preferred build, with the other either becoming a utility skill like Hone Slash Path 1-1 for Pierce builds, or a backup damaging skill like Pierce is for Dragon Tongue builds, while you're outside the Black Dragon buff up time. A blue book that enables you to use Hong Moon block has a massive impact on your life in grouped content and should be prioritized right after the core of your build. Another thing is that Cyclone is at the top of the focus core list for its massive impact, but that only really applies for players that are comfortable with regularly blocking enemy attacks. If not, that's fine, and you should get it once you're comfortable enough with tanking and the class itself. At last, let's not forget to also get sets of either 2 times or 4 times CC of the same kind, to be able to solo CC a boss in dungeons. As for skill point distribution, I would always recommend to max out your core damaging abilities, the ones you use a lot in your rotation, which will most likely be either any Lunar Slash, any Pierce, or the second and third Hone Slash. After done with those skills, you can look at putting points into one of the skills from the damage category if you see yourself using it a lot. Let's not forget about tanking. If you want to be the tank as a Blade Master, you will only really need 2 things. For one, a good Cyclone that procs when you block attacks to keep up a good amount of focus regeneration. And on the second note, the blue block threat block spec with Hong Moon block alongside it. Those are the only things you really need to be a good and proper tank. Everything else is just down to getting aggro, doing or even teaching the required mechanics, and aligning the boss's attack patterns in such a way that makes the lives of every other member of your party comfortable. For the PvP priority tier list, you will have to firstly keep the following things in mind. First, you need to know how to deal damage during your CCs instead of just CCing an opponent and doing nothing to them. The end goal is to reduce their life points to 0 and to not just combo them until their tab escape is back up. That's a general rule, unless you're in a team environment like 6v6 or open world PvP, where you can let other players deal damage for you. For example, a classic combo is for BMs to knock somebody into the air, and for a summoner or force master to kill them while they're in the air, since BMs have, if not the longest air combo in the game. The best abilities to deal damage for you are your burst skills, lightning draw and Flashstep, because of which they are ranked so highly on this tier list. Other than that, you will still have your usual rotation skills like Lunar Slash and Pierce. Compared to the previous list, I would value Pierce higher than Hone Slash in PvP, for its ease of use in basic stance combined with maximum boosting abilities like Cyclone. The next thing for PvP is that you want to have as much skills with CC on them as possible, unless a certain skill book can offer you other useful things like damage on, for example, Lunar Slash instead of their day spec, or iframes with, for example, shoulder charge or 5-point strike instead of their day specs. Don't forget to also get some chi regeneration in your build, or else you will be starving for focus after one combo, since most CC and damage skills require a good amount of focus. Specifically in this tier list, I have made a clear distinction between the Hongmong C and the regular C, because the regular 2 specs path 1 and 4 are still viable in PvP for either their focus regeneration or simple knockdown, while the HMC paths 2 and 3 have just a higher impact on your PvP adventures overall. After having said all this, skill choices should be made purely on preference and how you like to play the class. Not everybody will play the same way with the same skills or even have the same books available to them. Play with the things you enjoy and have access to. You can make a lot of great builds that work in PvP, PvE or even in both. And don't forget to go have fun. That's what life's all about. Hey there, I'm Shady. We finally reached the end, and thank you a lot for staying with me the whole way through. Unexpectedly, it took me a lot longer to create this video since I started making it at the beginning of February, but I'm still happy with how it turned out, and I hope I could help you as well. I also plan on doing more in-depth videos about the 5 main builds BMs have. So please let me know if you enjoyed this kind of high effort video, have any kind of feedback, or want to know more about blade&soul. So with all things said, I love you and stay safe.